All right. Make sure. There we go. All right. So I will actually have each panelist go one by one. And again, please make sure that you use the chat accordingly. We would love to hear all of your questions. And let's go ahead and get started. So Douglas, would you like to go ahead and begin?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. And I'm currently at North Carolina State University. I'm working at the interface between university and government, where we're supporting NOAA, a National Center for Environmental Information, the world's largest data center on environmental sciences. And my research, I graduated from Department of Geographical Sciences. My research focused on using statistical modeling and satellite remote sensing data to study climate change going back to 1980s. So I was trained as a statistician, and because my personal interest, I moved into the field of climate and environmental conservation. So I try to combine my quantitative skills from my statistical backgrounds with the data, the vast majority of data from satellites to study the topic of climate change and environmental conservation. So I have been working on this field since my master's, so that's about 12 years ago. And I found that this opportunity through a really unique networking events that I attended in a professional conference about 4 years ago for my current job, where I met one of my supervisor here in the institute, which is supported by the government agency. And we mostly focusing on how to use the environmental data to support the issues that relate to the society, from climate to drought to public health, while my colleague here is working on the interface of combining climate data with public health and how we can use those environmental information to better inform decisions on the societal issues related to public health, like the heat stress and mental health caused by those natural disasters. So there are a lot of things that I never know that I could do with all my degrees and all my skills before I come to this job. So I think one advice I would provide is that stay open-minded to all those opportunities that you might get. And I think I may yield my time to other panelists.
Thank you so much. Bradley, your thoughts and kind of your journey to where you are now.
Sure. So I started at Maryland in government and politics with a focus on international economics. And at that time, I still had a substance use and psychiatric focus. I focused on special populations, jail populations, military populations, and their health. After a couple of years, I decided that it would be good to kind of get more formally into a health field. So after completing my master's and completing my comprehensive exams, I switched over to epidemiology and biostatistics. And I think I was in the first graduating class. I'm not sure. I might have been for that department. My focus there was on the longer term health effects of conflict, different forms of conflict, whether it was war, terrorism, genocide, or other forms of violence, particularly as it related to psychiatric issues, substance use problems, or diarrheal and related conditions, kind of a broad array of conditions that might emerge. From there, I went on to do a postdoc at Columbia University, where I kind of drifted into a 50-50 situation. And kind of one of the themes I want to relate is this is an international world issues forum, but often what happens when you get involved in international world issues is that you may find yourself in a situation where a lot of your work is US focused research and work, because it's that's the way you can often find a lot of jobs, but you might still have an international focus. So later on, if we have time, one of the themes I wanted to talk about is how you can talk about the things that you did. So I now work as an epidemiologist at the National Institutes of Health. My institute is the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism. And I still have international projects. So we have international ER projects where we look at alcohol and related issues that emerge from that in a clinical setting. We have large genetic samples that we collect, and we look at the genetics of substance use disorders. We also conduct a number of international surveys of military personnel and other individuals over a long-term period. But a lot of our work is also US focused. Anyway, so one last aside before I kind of give up the floor is that I got to this stage of my career where I'm working as an epidemiologist at NIH, but I tested the water in a lot of different areas. And what didn't work out and why is almost as interesting as what did work out and why. So when you look at someone's LinkedIn profile, you see, where am I working? Well, where am I not working? And maybe I wanted to work there, or maybe it didn't work out, or maybe there was challenges for working in that specific area. And so, I mean, I'm happy to talk about some of the things I wasn't successful at, or just didn't work. I didn't know it wasn't good until I actually tried to apply there, or people actively told me not to work there once I got there, which actually happened a couple of times. Don't come here, please. It's not good. So yeah, so that's where I am now. I'm at the National Institutes of Health. I'm an epidemiologist. It seems like more people know about us after COVID. Maybe didn't know much about what epidemiologists were doing before, for better or worse. Now we're pretty well known. So I yield the floor.
Thank you. And I think a couple things that you said sparked some questions. I'm over here taking notes on what all y'all are saying. So be prepared for some questions a little bit later. I do want to go ahead and ask Nooruddin, Dr. Shah, about his story and your kind of career trajectory from Maryland to where you are now.
Thanks, Christina. I graduated last year. I did my PhD in international education policy from College of Education, UMD. My research focus was teacher training and teacher recruitment. So I was lucky enough to start working before my graduation, actually. So I started working for Global Partnership for Education in DC. And 3 years ago, I started working. So I finished my coursework, and at the time when I was working on my research, I started my job at GPE, Global Partnership for Education. I would say that my degree, because I was not graduated, so more than my degree, my past experience and networking worked for, in my case. But I think in our sector, international development and within education development, a PhD is very valued and a good degree to start working, especially in international organizations. Being an international student, I would say I'm coming originally from Pakistan, and it was quite challenging here in the US. And more than I think US citizens, for international students, getting a job before or after graduation is quite difficult. Many employers will be asking for either OPT or work authorization. So all those difficulties and challenges which are not faced by US citizens, international students have to face those. So luckily in my case, I faced only few of those difficulties. But I think it would be good that during question and answer sessions, we can go into detail of some of those issues. So that's just a quick overview of my career.
Yes, thank you so much. As someone who does more domestic related work, it's always so interesting to learn about other people's research. And I think one question that a lot of us as doctoral students and candidates kind of consider is, how did you get to your research topic? And what kind of informed that decision to pursue that particular topic? And how does that topic now relate to what you're doing now? Because I know, Bradley, you kind of talked about how you kind of made a switch from politics to epidemiology. So if you all could go ahead and speak to how you even came to your topics or what inspired your research, and how does that kind of live on in the work that you do now?
Do you want to choose who goes first?
This could be an organic conversation. If we want to do a little popcorn style, that's totally fine too. But Bradley, if you would like to begin, that would be fantastic.
Sure. So what I was looking at this subject, I think a lot had been written on different forms of violence, mass broad forms of violence. But what was kind of understudied, and this is kind of the important thing for me, was finding an area that had interest, broader interest on different topics, but had areas that weren't completely fleshed out. Obviously, that's the goal, right? I mean, you want to be within a realm where people are going to maybe cite your research, they're going to be interested in your research. It's not so novel and so out there that people aren't going to attach themselves to it. You know, I wanted to enter into an existing conversation and contribute to that existing conversation. There on the government and politics side, there's a lot of talk about what creates a stable peace. On the economic side, there's a lot of talks about how industry is destroyed. On the health side, we hear a lot about refugee populations, the immediate deaths of the conflict. And so what I wanted to do is adjust that and say, okay, the conflicts have ceased. It's a few years later. What are the longer term impacts on health systems, infrastructure, hospitals, the population? The war ends, the news stops, but then the people continue to live on in their life. And so what we find is many years later, and sometimes it takes years for disease to develop. It's not immediate. I mean, cholera outbreaks could happen in the aftermath of a disaster or a conflict, but you know, cancers, other conditions are longer term conditions that develop due to longer term exposures or lack of infrastructure. So that's what I wanted to focus on. It was fortunate that new data was emerging there. We have the Global Burden of Disease Project, obviously, which is fairly well known. And we have other data collection that's been ongoing from the United Nations. So I just saw an opportunity with first of all, you have to have data available if you want to do quantitative research. So in my case, there was interesting questions and there was data that was available. Looking back, I think that there are a lot of challenges to those particular research projects. It was wonderful to do for the purposes of my dissertation. I used that research to get a F31 graduate research award from NIH, and I used it to get an F32 postdoctoral award. But in terms of areas of work to join, it did pose some challenges. So it was good that I was also doing other work at the same time. To be honest, yeah, I mean, to be honest, I mean, I'm not the only one either. I mean, my friends, when we were doing our dissertations, I have friends who did work in osteoporosis and now they work in infectious disease, right? So sometimes you end up in completely different avenues than you were even starting. I mean, your dissertation is really just the beginning of the journey. It doesn't necessarily have to even relate to what you do as an occupation. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And so in my case, clearly I'm not working in disaster mitigation and post-conflict relief, but it's still a topic that I, appear in groups for, say, for World Health Organization or whatnot. But that's just tangential to my actual job.
Thank you so much. Douglas, any words?
Yeah, I can jump in because I have some research related to public health, like in the infectious disease field, because my story is a long story. As I mentioned, I was trained as a physician during my earlier education. So, but I have strong feelings about the environment. So I was part of a lot of the student groups on environmental conservation while I was in college. And that's where I find that math and statistics becomes a little bit boring when I was in the college time, because it's really theoretical and I really want to do something more on the applied side. So that's when I reached out and started doing the research for undergraduates. So as an undergraduate, I started doing research on the environmental topics, and I met my master thesis advisor. So that's how I switched from statistics to like environmental science. And that's where I got the inspiration that I really want to do the research, go through the research route. So and I'm also fortunate to have a really supportive master's advisor, and he has been really fundamental how I get into this research path. And he had recommended me to go through a PhD program. So that's when I applied the PhD program at Maryland to get my PhD in geographical sciences, where I still focus on using my quantitative skills and more on the machine learning side. That's where my expertise lies in, and to apply it to the satellite data that can be used to study those important issues like climate. So during my PhD time, I was involved with some of the government's satellite programs to develop algorithms and methods to do the product so that can be used by weather service and by other groups to predict the weather and also to do those emergency response to disasters. So there's a quite long journey that I've been through, and now I'm at a place where I found that my interest more goes further down the road of the applied side, because in the past I'm still doing a lot of methods and development for data sets. Now I'm more in the field that I really want to apply those data sets to study those issues related to the public, because we have established those consensus among scientists that climate change is real and is caused by greenhouse gases. And I think now more we want to pay attention to make sure people understand what the impact is on their daily lives. It impacts on air quality, it impacts on the droughts, different extreme events, and also it impacts on public health. So in the past, I've done some modeling work, link climate with malaria risks in the Southeast Asia, because the climate change will change the population dynamics of the mosquitoes, which will host those virus and then can transmit to the human populations. And there are still a lot of people doing that. So one of my colleague at Department of Geographical Sciences, her dissertation focused on that in Myanmar and how the malaria disease risk can be modeled using satellite data. So it's a long journey that from my original like statistical training to what I've been doing right now, and more focused on the applied side using those skills.
Thank you so much. I think oftentimes we're just like, wow, they're a PhD, but we never quite think about the journey. So thank you for sharing that. Nooruddin, would you like to share anything in terms of kind of how you arrived at your research topic, and how does that translate to what you do now?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Christina. My research topic, I would say that when I started my PhD, I was still not sure, where I'll be focusing my research. But after taking some of the courses, and one course from one of my professors, which focused on teachers training and teachers' lives, that course, helped me to make a decision that yes, this is the area where I want to focus. And then also, because of my background in international development, where I observed and where the global data showed that more than 600 million children are not learning, and 2/3 of them are actually in the classrooms but not learning. So within classrooms, now there is a consensus that teacher is a single most effective factor influencing quality of teaching. So I thought that maybe I'll focus on teachers, and it's a broad area, but I narrowed down on focusing on teacher training and recruitment in rural areas. And within rural areas, I looked at remote mountain societies in Pakistan. So my findings not only helped me for that region, but also in rural and remote areas of other, developing countries, especially Africa and Asia. And when I was applying for my job, I think this was really helpful, as most of the organizations working in education development, they look at expertise and knowledge, especially for quality of education. And within quality, they look at, if there are any expertise on teachers. So that really helped me. And I think my professors were quite helpful, uh, enabling me to make a decision that, this will be the area of my focus.
Thank you so much. I wanted to go ahead and check in with the audience to see if there are any questions by any of the participants for the panelists. Just wanting to check in. All right, well, we're just going to keep it rolling then. So in the beginning, I believe it was Bradley who mentioned the idea of failure and not being successful in different moments within your kind of pathway to where you are now. Are you all able to kind of explain to us maybe a key moment, either within your doctoral career or within your professional career, in which you learned a very valuable lesson in that moment of failure? And we'll go ahead and start with Douglas this time.
Sure. And I think this word that people may have heard so many times is the imposter syndrome, that we all think that we are not like suited for the things that we want to do. And I was recently in an interview for some summer interns for our projects, and he immediately like started this question. I was really shocked, and that is also the moment that I realized that everyone has that moment, that we might think through the long journey that we think that maybe I'm not good enough to do the things that we want to do. But actually, I have been like thinking on the topic of failure a lot, and recently I have been working with some other colleagues in the professional society meetings, try to convene sessions on normalizing discussion about failure in the graduate school, in the career of a student, to make sure that people know it's okay to discuss about failure. And that relates to a lot of different issues like the mental health, and for the students in the grad school, and also for the early career members. So failure is a topic that I think is really important. So when Bradley mentioned that, I was like, yes, that I forgot to say it, but Bradley mentioned it, so it's great. I think it's moments that there needs to have some culture change to normalize that, because I think a lot of times in grad school, we have a great researcher, at least in University of Maryland, and all the advisors are great in succeeding to get the grants, get their paper published, and get everything they want. At least that's what it looks like. But like on their own journey, they also experience a lot of failures. There will be like grants get rejected. There will be like papers got rejected. So, but we don't talk about that like in our daily work in the grad school. It's always the news always say that, oh, there's another paper published from department. Oh, there's another grant that's a like $1 billion from department. So when the selected bias of success in the discussion, it's always overshadowing for those like daily failure that may happen, that your experiment may fail and your research may not go the way that you want. That it's okay to talk about that. And that, I think, if we can start a discussion, normalize that discussion, I think that would be really helpful for the student in the graduate school.
All right, thank you so much. Bradley, would you like to chime in?
Sure. So I think trying to work in global health proper, like to have a position that was very clearly in global health, brought about a number of challenges for me personally along the way. and I can talk about a couple of them. So after I completed my doctorate, I went and I did a postdoc. I was still doing 50-50 global health research, 50% pure US related research in clinical settings. And I guess at the time I was open to different opportunities. So I was interviewing for positions on the tenure track to be a professor. I was exploring private industry. I was exploring NGOs and other organizations. I tried different avenues, and they all had opportunities, challenges, upsides and downsides in different ways. So I can relate some of those. I mean, this is the international forum, so I want to keep it as international as possible. So the first relates to kind of my experiences immediately after graduating, or around the time I was graduating with my doctoral degree. The kind of advice I got, and the kind of challenges that emerged from networking, the kind of challenges emerged from not knowing about the jobs in the field. And let me go through those one at a time. So the first was I would try to seek kind of advice from individuals who were already professors or already directors of NGOs or whatnot. And I kind of encountered a number of issues. The first is that individuals will also often forget the challenges that they faced. It's a kind of self-preservation amnesia, right? You know, obviously there's a lot of stress if you're trying to get a professorship on the tenure track. You might apply to 50 schools, do a bunch of interviews. You might get some offers, but it's extremely stressful. You know, one university, I got my phone call for a potential flyout, and I did a video interview in December, about 12th, and they called me to fly out the next December on Christmas Eve. So it was a year before they actually got back to me. So those kind of experiences can be extremely stressful, and I forgot it. Honestly, I forgot it because I have a job now, and I'm like, great, I got a job. That's good. Let's just forget about the bad times that happen down the way. You know, new challenges can emerge, and individuals just couldn't relate them. I can't relate to people graduating right now who are experiencing the circumstances of COVID, what getting a job is going to be like. And so it's kind of important to know that my experience getting a job, you know, shortly after the financial crisis of 2008 is going to be wildly different than a second crisis right now. I can only be so helpful to you. Like, honestly, I mean, I can be honest. I can tell you that it's more difficult to even get hired at my institute, things like this. But I honestly don't know the challenges of all digital interviews, expectations for work in your first year, given it's all digital. I don't know. So having individuals admit that they don't know. So, for example, the challenges that might emerge. So, for example, in global health right now, there's a giant push, and this is actually very practical, to hire local individuals to do local projects, right? It makes sense to hire individuals who work in Zimbabwe to do, you know, water purification projects in Zimbabwe. I mean, it makes sense. But this also disengages individuals globally from working in Zimbabwe. So that's an issue that's been going on for many years. It makes sense, but at the same time, it's a process that's limiting the access to jobs and projects that you might want to get involved with. And it's happening very rapidly. So individuals who got a job 20, 30 years ago had things available to them that are no longer available to them due to changes in the shifting funding landscape and whatnot. Some people don't want to talk about the challenges. You know, honestly, some people just want to talk about the good times. You know, I went to one university to interview, and you know, I had some people saying it was great, and then I had two professors take me to lunch and told me, "Don't come here; it's terrible." And so, I mean, you know, what is it? What's the truth? What's going on here, right? And that happened on more than one occasion. That happened at two universities. I had professors say, "Just don't come here; it's toxic; it's terrible." I interviewed at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for a program officer position, and things I didn't know. I mean, salary was wonderful, benefits were wonderful. You know, what I didn't understand was what the role entailed. They're essentially a funding agency similar to USAID. You don't actually interact with people working on the ground. You're working in an office, setting up, what are functionally grants, right? So it's no different than working at USAID or perhaps even as a program officer or health service administrator. Things I didn't know additionally, I mean, there's so many. I've got a huge list of things to talk about. For example, you know, getting into international health or international issues, maybe it's beyond health. A lot of work is full-time. Some of it is term limited. For example, if you want to work at Peace Corps, which I didn't actually apply there, but Peace Corps is all term positions. So what kind of work are you happy to have? Do you want permanency? Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is 2-year terms with no renewal. So you better like Seattle, you better like moving out to Washington, or have a plan for after Washington, because they don't hire anyone above program officer or below. There's only like 2 or 3 roles above that anyway. And like one of them is Bill. So, you know, that's an issue to kind of focus on. Myself, I've always been a pragmatist. I like seeking a salary, benefits, defined benefits and pay, leave, and having, you know, some comfort like that. So there were challenges in certain roles, especially in the international space, where there's a kind of downward crush of salary. The more international you get, to kind of lower the salary, lower overhead costs, which is something to be mindful of. Limitations of networking is another issue we could talk about later, that I didn't realize. So most of the positions I was successful in finding were kind of tit for tat networking. I could offer someone something in our relationship. I'm working on a project. Would you like to get involved? I spent a lot of time going to Yale for their annual global health summits and whatnot, the Unite for Sight conference and other conferences and things like this. I honestly wasted my time a lot in networking. Like, it wasn't that they were failures. It was just that I had a goal in mind. I thought that networking was something that actually happens maybe more than it actually does at these kind of events. You know, there would be panels of experts in the job hunting category, and yet no one was hired. I mean, this should be like a signal to you. Like, why are there 5 people talking in a jobs workshop, but not a single person is either in a position to hire or can help you get hired? So that's something to always be mindful of as well. So yeah, I mean, there were a lot of challenges. Just to be mindful of what kind of roles people have, whether they're supervisory or not, when you're trying to network, whether they can know the challenges of being hired in different roles, something to be mindful of. And something I always try to advocate for, something I didn't do enough, was to be forward looking and constantly looking at different jobs. Current projects might just be current projects for the next 5 or 10 years, and it might go away. So kind of see where the river is going, and just kind of say, okay, I don't want to just apply for projects and jobs and opportunities now. I want to see what's going to be funded 10 years from now, so I can still be employed and working on these projects. Yeah, so a lot of challenges, a lot of weird situations that happened to me along the way. You know, I honestly did not have any clue of what to expect in any of these situations. You know, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation flew me out. I didn't know what to expect. Kind of a surreal experience, flying out to schools to try to be a professor in global health. Only some schools actually had kind of international related professor positions. It's a very small wedge. So, I mean, if your goal is to be in the international field in academia, it can be very challenging because it is a very, very narrow wedge. Yeah, so everything brought its own challenges. And if you have any specific questions about those, I can relate the other peculiarities. But I ended up at NIH through networking. You know, honestly, I would just engage people, and the way I would engage them is very aggressively. I would say, I would have some set of analyses done. I would have some project already underway, and I'd say, hey, my name is Brad. Would you like to be on this paper with me? It's already underway. I've got something that you might like here. And they like that. Oftentimes networking is a win more, right? You would go to an event, professors, experts, they're there to see other professors and experts that they know, right? Or that can help them because they're in a position where they have the means and whatnot to actually work with them and help them in their circumstances. So the times where I wasn't successful was where I didn't have something to offer. That's not to say that everybody's going to be rude and want something in return, but it doesn't hurt. So
Right.
that's something to keep in mind. Anyway, I've got a lot more to say with this.
Oh, no, you're fine. We appreciate all the gems that you're dropping. And I will say, before we go ahead and have Nooruddin start, that I, as a Seattle native, I hear what you're saying. And Seattle would have been lovely. And
I liked it.
Really beneficial for you, and the city would have welcomed you in with warm arms.
Right.
So Nooruddin, any challenges that you faced along your way, and kind of how did you overcome those particular failures? And then I see that Ashley asked a question, and we'll head on into that after.
Yeah, definitely. Being international students, we have more challenges, I would say, you know, and in a way we are disadvantaged compared to, you know, domestic students from here. First, finding a job. Second, I would say, you know, all those legal documentation and authorizations. So F1 students who are in US, they cannot work outside their campus. So when we can only work once we graduate through OPT. So in my case, it was a difficult decision because I got a job offer, but for a very short time. And our university had an option that they could allow me to go out, work there, and come back on F1 as an internship. So the university required that, okay, if it's internship in summer, you can go and work. But my employers were saying, no, this is not internship. So we are not going to write the word internship in the letter. We will offer you this job if you want to do this summer. That's good. Otherwise, we are going to hire someone else. So, and our university was fixed that, no, we can allow you to work outside campus only for internship, not for a job as F1 student, which was a difficult decision. So if I had to leave F1 status, then, you know, and if my job will not continue, then it was a difficult situation for me. But luckily my job continued, and even now it's like on annual extension. So the day the job will end, I can stay in the country only for 1 month, and then I have to leave the country. So these are the challenges which, you know, international students have to face, which not many, you know, students from US face. And then again, job hunting, because we don't have that many connections here. So the only source is either, you know, our alumni or our professors who are, you know, linked to campus, or someone from our past, you know, experiences. So those connections are helpful. And within our industry, our professors have very good connections, so they can be helpful. But it's a difficult task. Even during these times, like I have applied for, while being employed, for like long-term position for 5 different positions, but never heard back, although we thought that, you know, I'm fully qualified, even with a PhD and relevant experience, but you never get shortlisted. So those are the definitely challenges. I think my advice would be that maybe, you know, prospective applicants should talk more to their peers and faculty. So, you know, instead of searching in isolation, it could be really a stressful, you know, task, and it could be difficult, especially when we are doing our research on campus. So both tasks together could be very stressful. I think the priority should be to, you know, remain, you know, in our sanity, be healthy, do some exercise, focus on our research, but at the same time, just as, you know, a second priority, keep in touch with, you know, our professors, colleagues, or other connections to find, you know, a job or, you know, any future opportunities. So that's, I would say, a quick reflection.
Yeah.
But if someone has a question, then I can go into details.
That was a great reflection.
Over.
That was a great reflection. Thank you so much. I see that Ashley placed a question in the chat. Does anyone have insights on finding global health oriented experiences, even while we are primarily working remotely still?
Well, I guess that's me. Like it could be Douglas too. I don't know. Like, but specifically health related and global health. So I mean, even before COVID, it was a challenge. I have to say, like, I'm happy where I ended up. I'm not unhappy at all. NIH is a great place to work. And some of my good, you know, maybe 15–20% of my work is related to international definitions of disease or for some projects. And I was kind of heartbroken though to not actually be in the global health space. And some of that is the kind of trajectory you need to go through to get kind of the permanent higher paying jobs in global health. There is an expectation that you get experience, particularly in the field. Some positions have actually no interaction with individuals overseas operating, but still require having experience, having worked overseas. So with COVID, it's very challenging. One thing I would say is acquiring additional language skills is always important. So I wanted to work in a specific region where I have relatives. And so I brushed up on language skills that would be relevant for that region. Language proficiency doesn't take the place of having experience in the field, but it's important. You know, the big ones, of course, are French, Spanish, and other languages that would cover broad populations across the world. But man, with COVID, it's extremely difficult. Again, I don't know what the expectations are. Are people going to be, are hiring agents going to be more or less willing to accept that the challenges disallowed you to go overseas, to get experience, to get this kind of work experience? I don't know. I would hope that they would be a little more forgiving. But I honestly don't know. There was a number of positions where I just I wasn't able to even apply because I hadn't already worked in the field. Again, this is goes back to the kind of point I made earlier about how there's a challenge that no one really knows. It's brand new. I tried to get some experience in several ways, probably some ways that you can do with COVID. So before I started my postdoc, I had like a paid kind of internship position in that summer with USAID. They have the Global Health Fellows program. It's a good program. So you can interact with people working in a lot of different spaces. At the time, it was there was room to go overseas. So for example, it was a 3-month program and you can make it what you want. We had individuals who were paid. I mean, the pay was pretty good too. So I would look at the Global Health Fellows program and I would look at the internship program that they run. You can do it concurrent with your school or other things because it's not too demanding. They're kind of flexible. It is what you make of it. So I ended up publishing a couple of articles with Michael Barnhart, who's in their HIV/AIDS division at USAID. Some individuals worked with women's health, violence against women groups, and they went to overseas. So I had people, there were people who went overseas to Uganda twice in one 3-month period. Things are obviously different now, but I think the opportunity is still open there. So that's one kind of thing that you can do, is to work with the funding agencies themselves in any capacity you can. There's an expectation to, if you're going to work at, Gavi or John Snow or some other places, some roles will require some kind of international experience. But if you work at the funding agencies proper, like USAID had a relationship with Public Health Institute and some other groups, that could help, because now you're understanding the mechanism. So I was working with a group who was funding microbicidal gels for HIV prevention. And so it was good to see how the funding worked, how the money went out, what the grants look like. what the applications look like, and to get an idea about this. I really hate to say it. I mean, I feel like unfortunately the work is not going to be as exciting in the global health field. You're not going to be interacting with individuals, obviously. At NIH, we've had a lot of projects put on hold that had interactions with human subjects. I can only imagine that projects in an international capacity are either on hold or have very strict regulations there right now. But yeah, so it's going to be a lot of paperwork. And at this time, if you're unable to get into the field, if you're unable to work hands-on, I would try to look for opportunities with the funding agency specifically. And I mean, that's honestly the best you're probably going to be able to do until restrictions are lifted. And I would also look at countries who are lifting restrictions eventually. Vaccinated individuals might be able to get overseas experience or experience with interacting with actual people in the field within 8 months. And I feel like applying now or within the next 4 months is going to be very vital to that, because the second the doors are open, there's going to be a mad rush for individuals to get these opportunities. But again, I mean, the world is different now than it was before. And, I had some challenges because we had a hiring slush, a hiring freeze, whatever you might call it, at NIH and across the government when I was coming in. And that posed unique challenges. And I can only imagine it's the same now. So yeah, global health is a very interesting and a very difficult field. There's a lot of sacrifices you have to probably make. And some of them I was unwilling to make. I was unwilling to not choose some relative area, geographic region where I wanted to work. Sometimes they said, you're going to work where you're going to work. 2 years here, and then maybe we're going to send you over there for 2 years. And I didn't want that kind of lifestyle, especially since I was, my wife and I were considering a family at the time. So there were challenges for life stage. I mean, for me, we were looking at children, looking at settling down, and being told every 2 years to go somewhere was a challenge. Yeah, so there was a lot of challenges that came up, and I'm sure everyone in the chat is at a different stage of life and looking at different things that they might be interested in. If you're kind of not really locked down into a defined area, maybe caring for elderly family or wanting to settle down in for whatever reason that's personal to you, I always advocate for aggressively getting involved in projects and experiences internationally if you can, and as early as you can, because those experiences are required for like middle to high level careers. Like we're talking 6 to 10 years of that kind of experience. And so if you don't get it, you're not going to move up. So when things eventually do settle down, you want to jump right into that as quickly as you can. But if you can't, you're going to want to look at these internationally tangential jobs, either the jobs that are funding agencies or the jobs where you can have some international component to your work, but you're working in the US, your job is permanent if possible, etc. So, I mean, that's the kind of advice I would have. Aggressive and early if you can, but if you can't, I mean, life is life. What can you do, right? You can't do it. So you have to be more realistic. Like I had to be realistic and move on.
I just want to follow up with some of the things that Bradley said. I think, I'm not sure what stage actually you are at right now, but trying different things never hurts. So like in global, as I think Maryland, located around DC area, is a very good location for you as a strategic advantage that you can try different things with different type of jobs related to global health. You have NGOs, you have public sector, you have private sector, you have different consulting companies, which a lot of them do contracting work with the government agencies. So there are a lot of different things you can try out. And even if you can also apply for fellowships, like National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine have a fellowship on science and technology policy. And one of the board in the academy is focused on the public health, and not just one, there are multiple focus on public health. And so you can apply it. And I think this year's deadline is today. So it might be too late for you to apply it this year, but you can always apply it for the next 5 years after your terminal degree. So you can always try it where you are trying to explore in different things. And I have worked with Susan before. So if you talk with Susan, Susan will always say, do an informational interview, right? Just like go find a person that who are working in the work that you might be interested in, just go talk with them. And there'll always be, well, especially if you have the connection with Maryland, such like .NET that just launched, you might find some people who want to, a lot of people willing to like talk with you about their experience and how they got their current position. And I know we're short on time, so I'm just stop here.
Okay. Yeah, just one point. I think what you said is very important. There are many areas in international health that come with their own pluses and minuses. And so for the more public-oriented NGO kind of related positions you get, the salary could be depressed, the kind of benefits could be depressed, the term could be more defined, it could be less permanent work because they're more dependent upon certain contracts to be fulfilled. So there's the public side, and honestly, there is an international consulting side too as well. So I mean, there are major consulting firms that do a lot of international work. What are the challenges for those? I mean, the public NGOs, you're going to have more kind of a good feeling about the work you're doing sometimes. In international consulting kind of capacity, there are a number of firms that do this kind of work. It is an avenue to check. The pay will be very good. You're going to be given projects to work on. You're not going to necessarily have a choice. And some of the work is going to be more related to kind of defined projects towards, achieving a higher profit margins, or it's not necessarily with a kind of like humanist kind of benefiting the populations at mind for those kind of positions. But I mean, there is a spectrum of positions from truly kind of NGOs, kind of very open, transparent companies, to the ones that are very closed off. And even with NGOs, the Gates Foundation is very closed off in terms of their salaries and benefits and things like this, versus other agencies which are entirely transparent down to the penny. So it's something to think about. There are many consulting firms. Like, nobody really knows what they do. They don't even know what they do. I always tell the story that there was I don't know if it was McKinsey or what, but they had a video about what is a consultant, and they had first year junior consultants, and they were doing an interview about it. And he said, well, when I came to the company, I didn't know what a consultant was. And by the end of the video, I still didn't have an idea that he knew what a consultant was. But obviously he's happy and he had a nice suit. So if that's something that's of interest to you, expanding your idea of what international work is to kind of a private kind of development of projects, because we do have public-private partnerships. Don't just look at the public side, maybe also look at the private side who's working on these projects in collaboration with the governments and the local groups. So, I mean, that's an avenue to look at as well.
I did want to go ahead and take the last 5 minutes of the panel and address the last question that was placed in the chat by A. David Prina. At everyone on the panel. When I first started looking for jobs, I found that I struggled to articulate my value and what I bring to a team or organization. So for our last question, do you happen to have any advice for job seekers on how to show your value? And Nooruddin, we will start with you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I would admit that I also struggle for the same thing, even now. So I think it's a struggle by all job seekers, in my experience, both as interviewee and interviewer. So on the both, in my past, I have been on the both sides of table. I would say it depends on the organizations you are applying, but I would say that instead of focusing on how to articulate my value to the team, first, in my case, I'll start at looking what the team and organization is looking for instead of what I'm bringing, So we look at what the organization is looking for, and then, try to tailor our skills, our experiences, and our, knowledge, focusing on that requirement from the organization. So I think in that case, there is more likelihood that one can get shortlisted, or during interview, if we focus more on those, areas which the organization and team is looking for. So those values and those skills and experiences. And I think all of us, we underestimate our skills and our experiences, but we should be more confident to write and to express clearly in our interviews all those experiences and skills which the organization is looking for. Because if we write something else and the organization is looking for something else, then there is no match. So that would be, my quick advice.
Thank you so much. Douglas, we'll come to you.
Yeah, I think maybe it is more on the interview process. So I think what Nord said is really important to identify to know your employer. So do some homework beforehand. That a lot of times, a lot of things will be described in the job like announcements. So especially if you are looking for a job that's more on the public side, that job announcements is an art. It's not just it's not just like the written word. So I've seen so many like retracted job announcement because they need to fine tune all those words to make sure it's what they're looking for. So in my institute that we have retracted one of the job announcement because there's some like errors in it. So we have to like put it down and then put it back again and people have to reapply. So the whole process, they will identify what they are looking for in the job board, which is need to pay a lot of attention. And during my interview, I talked with Susan. Susan have like worked with me on how to like piece together what they really want from the job board. So if you are applying for a job right now, make an appointment with Susan and try to she'll definitely help you to find the best answer you can give.
Perfect. And we'll round it out and finish up with Bradley.
Yeah, yeah. Like you said, I work at NIH. Hiring is centralized. Announcements are very consistent across institutes. A PO or an epidemiologist or a survey statistician, whatever the position may be, is going to be the same. It's going to be the same announcement regardless. So for the government, at least, it's pretty straightforward. They have a very defined set of of items, and you should have something related to each of those items to be considered highly. In other industries, it was very different. When I was applying to professor positions, things like my grants and my publications was very important. For Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and other places, they said, whatever, who cares? Like it's nice. It's like a writing sample at this point, right? It was like your experience kind of varied. So tailoring a resume, I think I still have a number of different resumes of very different lengths. So for some 15, 16 pages, for some 4 pages, because they just don't care about some of that stuff. It's just not important. I could speak directly to government hiring again. It's the announcements are very specific for a reason. They want, I mean, there's going to be an announcement with some set of skills that they want you to have. You're going to do a questionnaire online. The questions are going to say A through E. How much of an expert are you in this? How much experience do you have? Usually it's defined by a couple of years of experience, or the announcement's going to say, are you an expert? Did you do this in the course of your work? Did you have some training in this? Did you have some of this in your education? And you can answer just very directly. I would actually, if I were applying to a private role or whatnot, and I was looking at a private announcement, I would take the same approach to answering their questions that I would a federal government position. And I would just very, very, very directly and specifically tailor the resume to the items that they listed in the announcement alone. And just, of course, subsequent experience is always good with different softwares and things like this. But yeah, at least for the government, it's very specific. You want to address every single item. I mean, again, the question is, if you feel like you're lacking confidence in applying for a role, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think that it means that you're trying to, you always want to maximize your role wherever you are in your stage of your career. You want to maximize the position you can achieve, the pay you can achieve, the benefits, presumably. I mean, maybe that's not important to everyone. For me, it was valuable to establish a kind of baseline to move up. And if you feel a level of discomfort applying to a role, that means that maybe you're doing the right thing. That means maybe that you're applying for a job that you could get, you should apply for it, you should challenge yourself, you should try to get that role. If it seems too easy, maybe you should be pushing it a little higher and try to push the limits. Because honestly, applying for a role, whether it's applying for professor jobs or for private industry or for anything else, the worst thing that's going to happen is they're just not going to respond to you. There's nothing to even fear, right? As long as you're being honest in your answers, as long as you're not making up publications that don't exist or something like this, you're fine. I mean, they're just going to not respond, or they'll respond and then not choose you. So there shouldn't be any direct concern with that, as long as you're being honest. And you should just really feel that level of discomfort. You should try to push yourself and get the highest level role you can at that stage of your career, even if it feels like you don't absolutely meet those qualifications. Because to be honest, they're going to every industry is probably going to shoot for the stars on every position if they can. But if you have skills that they're interested in, they'll contact you. I would just apply to everything. That's what I would do. Honestly, never feel afraid to apply to any job. I would just apply to all of them.
I completely agree. Like, shoot your shot, apply to everything. I do want to say thank you so much to Doctors Rao, Kerridge, and Shah. I learned a lot on this panel. I hope you all did as well. And I just want to say thank you for your time. In addition, I wanted to remind you all that I dropped the link to the evaluation. Please go ahead and take some time to fill that out. It should be no more than 2 minutes. In addition, the next sessions will start at 2:30 to 3:30. So they will continue with the alumni panels and talk about the topics of education, communications, policy and advocacy, which some of you may be interested in, research careers into the social sciences, research careers in STEM, as well as startups. And so I just want to say thank you so much again to our panelists. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.